Today we're going to be doing a recipe called roasted tomato soup. You know, summer's a great time for tomatoes. They're in season and they're sweet and they're juicy, and for many of us we have a lot of them in our garden and we're looking for ways to use those summer tomatoes. Roasted tomato soup takes a lot of tomatoes. We're going to quarter them, put a little olive oil and balsamic vinegar, and then we're going to roast them in the oven for about 45 minutes to an hour to let them caramelize, to bring out all that natural sweetness. And then we're going to saute a little onion, put our tomatoes in there with some broth, and we're going to make a fabulous roasted tomato soup. This is a great way to get more vegetables in your diet, and for all those picky vegetable eaters that don't like veggies, you may get them to eat your roasted tomato soup. Let's get started. What I have here is our roasted tomatoes and onions. And what we did is we took a tomato and we quartered it. We put it in a bowl and we did 3 pounds of tomatoes with 1/2 an onion sliced, a tablespoon of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar, and salt and pepper, and just tossed it. And then we put them on a baking sheet. This is the first batch here that's done, and I have one more batch in the oven that's ready to come out. So while our tomatoes are cooling a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and make the croutons for our soup. So while they're in the oven, we can go ahead and puree our tomatoes. What I have here is a couple small whole wheat baguettes, and I'm just going to slice this. And you can use any wheat bread. If you have whole grain bread, you could just, sandwich bread, you could just cut it into quarters. We're just going to make these little toasted rounds with a little bit of Parmesan cheese to go on top of our soup. Okay, so we can just put these on our tray. And you can make these ahead of time as well. There we go. And I have a little bit of shredded Parmesan cheese. It doesn't need much. It's barely a teaspoon here. There we go. And we're going to just put these in about a 350-degree oven for about 10 minutes, just till the cheese melts and they get a little crispy. Now that we've had our tomatoes roasted, we're going to be adding them to our blender with a little bit of the chicken stock to puree them. And you want to get all the juice, which is actually some of the vinegar and olive oil that's going to give this a lot of flavor. So that's pretty full, so I think that's enough in here. We're going to put that on our blender, and I'm going to add a little bit of chicken stock to that. You don't have to heat this because we're going to heat it up after we get it all blended. Safer that way too, you're not dealing with hot liquid. Put the lid on, and then make sure, even though it's not hot, that you cover it with a towel just in case it leaks. You don't really want red pureed tomatoes all over your ceiling or you. And start the blender very slowly. And then you can turn up the power. And I'm just going to add this back to our soup pot over here. That's our tomato puree. Definitely going to need some more broth in here because it's pretty thick. Smells delicious. And then we want to put our heat on and heat this up. If you've never had homemade tomato soup, you're in for such a treat. It tastes so different, especially when you roast your tomatoes like this. Now that looks like it's ready. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pour a 1/2 cup of fat-free half and half in here. Now if I just pour this directly in here, the tomato soup is very acidic. 3 pounds of tomatoes, a lot of acid. Milk is very alkaline, and if you pour it in here, it's going to curdle. So I'm going to temper the non-fat half and half before I pour it in, which means I'm going to put a small amount of tomato soup in here, mix it up quickly. Now I have made this milk a little more acid, so when I pour it into the big pot of tomato soup, it won't curdle. And it's not. Perfect. And that just gives us such a great creamy texture. Now, second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to taste. We didn't add salt and we didn't add a lot of pepper. So we're going to taste right now to see if we need to adjust our seasonings. And again, really important to save this last step at the very end so you don't get too much salt early on, because as the tomatoes cook down and the broth cooks down, it does get a little more salty. So good. Does need some salt. We have a lot of soup here, so probably a couple teaspoons. Okay. And a teaspoon of pepper. Give this a stir. Let's do one more taste here and see if we've adjusted our salt enough. Perfect, so good. And I think we're ready. And I'm going to chop a little bit of fresh parsley. You can use fresh basil as well, or a mixture of fresh herbs. And again, all these fresh herbs gives all of our vegetable dishes such wonderful flavors, especially our vegetable soups. That's great. We'll put a good handful of this in our soup. And this looks like it's ready to serve.
When you make a big pot of soup like this, a vegetable soup, you may have some left over. And if you're not going to eat it within 2 or 3 days, I would say no more than 3 days in the refrigerator, put it in individual freezer containers and you can take it out and you can reheat it a couple weeks later, which is great to have that in your freezer. And the difference of homemade soup is we used fresh vegetables, we used a lot of fresh vegetables, and we used a reduced sodium chicken stock, so the sodium is lower than anything you would buy in a can. Okay, let's see here. It's nice and thick. Now we didn't add any garlic to this because we really didn't want to interfere with the sweet roasted tomato flavor of our summer tomatoes. You could add a small amount of garlic, but you don't want to make it taste like tomato sauce either. This is not a pasta sauce. And you know what? Let's get our croutons out of the oven. And this is our finisher. This is going to be our garnish to our soup. So just 1 or 2 of these little whole wheat cheesy croutons on top of there, along with maybe just another little pinch of fresh parsley. And there is a beautiful roasted tomato soup. I'm going to take a taste of this. It looks so good. It tastes so fresh, right out of the garden, but it has that caramelized roasted flavor that you don't get if you don't roast those tomatoes. This is so good, wonderful. It's even better because I know it's healthy too. It's great. This is Paulette Lambert from the Wellness Kitchen, where everything's nutritious and it's always delicious.